Hello, I'm Professor Kino and welcome to my Office of Cinematic Antiquity. Today we'll be talking about... When I did my top 10 favorite films of all time series when I started this channel, I made it a personal rule to include a maximum of one film per director, because I wanted to have my list be a more rounded representation of me and my taste in film. And the most difficult set of films to narrow down on was Quentin Tarantino's. While I finalized my choice with Reservoir Dogs, it could have easily been Pulp Fiction, or Inglourious Basterds, or Django Unchained, or any of his other then 8 films, if you count Kill Bill Volume 1 and 2 as a single film like Tarantino does. He is just a one-of-a-kind when it comes to filmmaking, and when he announces that he is working on another project, no matter how much is publicly known about it, cinephile ears across the world perk up. And that's exactly what happened when he stated that his 9th film would be called Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. All that I and most everyone else knew about it was that it was going to take place in 1969 Los Angeles, feature Charles Manson and Sharon Tate, and was going to have a dynamite cast, including a bunch of actors who have worked with Tarantino in the past, although strangely not Samuel L. Jackson. And that measly amount of information was enough to make Once Upon a Time in Hollywood one of my most anticipated films of the year. So how is the film? Is Tarantino still the brilliant director we have all come to respect? Premise. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood follows the lives of has-been actor Rick Dalton and his stuntman Cliff Booth as they work their way through the highs and lows of 1969 Los Angeles. Writing. This is a slice-of-life film with a Tarantino twist, and it's a very personal film. Tarantino moved to Hollywood in the 60s as a kid, and a lot of the film plays out like a memory. In fact, I related a lot to Alfonso Cuarón's Roma from last year. Much like how Cuarón dug into his past and reminisced about his childhood in 1970s Mexico City to create a romantic version of it, Tarantino dug into his past in order to create a romanticized version of 1969 Los Angeles, a time when the whole structure of the city was changing socially and politically. And Tarantino presents his vision to us through the lives of 3 people who all represent a different social tier in the City of Angels. The glitz and glam of the Hollywood elite presented to us through the life of the new glamorous starlet Sharon Tate, the struggles of the actors of yesteryear presented to us through the life of the fictionalized has-been actor Rick Dalton, and the sad reality of the Hollywood never-wers presented to us through the life of the fictionalized stuntman Cliff Booth, who never reached stardom but is still stuck in the shadow and influence of the city of flowers and sunshine. And together they paint a picture of Hollywood that is simultaneously a faithful reconstruction of the era and a fantastical and surprisingly mature interpretation of it, built from the memories of a child and the fanciful recollection of them by the same person, now an adult. And it makes for a fascinating and an entertaining time, if you are a fan of Tarantino and a fan of Hollywood and behind-the-scenes filmmaking. The dialogue is sharp and witty, and the scenes are creative and engaging, all traits that are expected of a Tarantino film. However, it is also a lot slower and seemingly a lot more aimless. There isn't an overarching plotline throughout the film, it's more of a series of dramatized scenes of people just living their lives, hence a slice-of-life film. Think Patterson or Manchester by the Sea, or most accurately, Hail Caesar, but a lot more fairy tale-like. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Get it? And so the final product is a film that combines the zeitgeist of 1969 Hollywood with caricatures of real people from the era, all wrapped up in Tarantino revisionist history. And while it is exquisitely crafted in that regard, the reality of it is that some people will find it boring. If you don't like the world that the film depicts, you'll most likely check out mentally because there won't be anything for you to latch onto. And when the film ends, you might end up thinking, what was the point? This is a film by someone who loves Hollywood and movies for people who share that feeling. Self-indulgent? Most definitely. But there is a clear audience out there that will adore it, and reminisce about a time long ago right alongside Tarantino. Acting. This cast is star-studded, so the acting is, as to be expected, amazing. But as for the 3 core actors, Leonardo DiCaprio as Rick Dalton, Brad Pitt as Cliff Booth, and Margot Robbie as Sharon Tate, they dominate. Now that DiCaprio has won his Oscar from 2015's The Revenant, which was surprisingly his most recent film before Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, he has come out of his acting hiatus with gusto. He taps into the fears that I can imagine all actors have, the doubting of their ability, relevance, and longevity, and delivers a performance that is relatable to not only other actors and filmmakers, but anyone who feels that their life is slipping out of their grasp and control. He is fantastic. Brad Pitt gives a similarly strong performance, but I would actually argue that his is even stronger. He's hysterical, charismatic, and badass. Cliff is given the best moments of the film, and Pitt delivers them in what amounts to the best performance that I have seen him give ever. Fantastic. And finally, Margot Robbie is solid as Sharon Tate. Definitely not as great as DiCaprio and Pitt, but then again, she isn't given all that much to do her say comparatively. However, Tate's sister has complimented the performance, saying that seeing Margot on screen as Sharon was like seeing her sister alive again 50 years later. So, in other words, Robbie does well with what she is given. And everyone else, even though most of their roles are small, give similarly amazing performances. Maya Hawke, Margaret Qualley, Sydney Sweeney, Austin Butler, Dakota Fanning, Luke Perry, Timothy Olyphant, Damon Herriman, Mike Moe, Al Pacino, Kurt Russell, Michael Madsen, Zoe Bell, Harley Quinn Smith, Bruce Dern, Julia Butters, and the list goes on and on and on. Tarantino is known for bringing out the best in the actors that he works with, and he doesn't disappoint here. This is some of the best acting that I've seen all year. Costumes, hair, and makeup. What's cool about this film is that not only are the costumes, hair, and makeup fantastic and help to bring 1969 to life, but in the film, there are also a few scenes where we see makeup being applied to people for a film being filmed in this film. And it's cool. We see, for instance, Leonardo DiCaprio go from having his stylish 1960s leather aviator-esque coat, aviator sunglasses, and khakis being replaced by the wardrobe of an old western villain, complete with fake handlebar mustache, and, as the director of the western called it, hippie hair. And it all looks great. So yes, the costumes, hair, and makeup are fantastic. And we see a lot of 60s fashion as well. Hawaiian shirts, full denim outfits, and all the fashion staples of Sharon Tate. She was a fashion model after all. I was completely absorbed by each and every wardrobe I saw. Set design. The streets and Hollywood sets of 1969 Los Angeles are recreated to amazing detail here. From old chain stores to neon signs to backlot sets to the Hollywood Hills to the desert to everything in between. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood teleports us back 50 years to a time past, but definitely not forgotten. And we get to see a lot of it. Tarantino has said in interviews that one of the things he remembers the most about Hollywood in the late 60s came from the car rides he had with his stepfather. He said he would often look up at his stepfather from the passenger seat and see the streets and signs of Hollywood flit past. Consequently, there are a lot of times in the film when our characters are just driving, and we as an audience are taken into Tarantino's own memories as he directs our attention out of the car's windows and onto the streets of Los Angeles. And it allows us to really take in the majesty of all the sets down to their most unexpected and welcome detail. Phenomenal work. Choreography. There are a few action scenes here, and they are all great. One involves Bruce Lee, or Mike Moe's impersonation of Bruce Lee, and it is good fun. Moe really nails a lot of Lee's motions, and in particular his voice, and so the whole scene is quite entertaining. Although Lee's ability is slightly reduced for the sake of the scene, and in many ways, the whole thing is played for a laugh, which could insult some fans of Bruce Lee, because when it gets right down to it, Lee in this film is only an exaggerated version of himself, something which his daughter Shannon has not taken too kindly to, but I personally found the scene entertaining nonetheless. However, the final scene combines some gloriously Tarantino-esque action, violence and style melded together, with a hefty amount of comedy, and the result is one of Tarantino's best sequences to date. Cinematography. Tarantino is one of the most acclaimed directors working today. Of course this film looks good. From the beautiful shots of Los Angeles to some fantastic long shots during the production of films within this film, to some really unique angles of characters and some fantastic framing, to the gratuitous shots of women's feet. He really isn't trying to hide his fetish anymore. This film is a Tarantino film. It's a unique, gorgeously shot affair. Editing. The cuts themselves are fantastic. The story never feels choppy. However, I do agree with some other critics when they say that this film could have had a little more shaving here and there. At times, while I appreciated the slow scenes that just sauntered around Los Angeles because it allowed me to see the wonderful sets, there did seem to be a few too many times when these scenes were just extended periods of people driving and listening to the radio. I get that it is the sort of experience that encompasses a lot of Tarantino's memories of the era, but I think the film could have benefited from a little more trimming. CGI. Tarantino was adamantly opposed to using CGI when he can use a practical method instead. To create 1969 Los Angeles, Tarantino and his production designer Barbara Ling used a combination of actual buildings that were around in 1969 that only needed to be refurbished with 60s stuff, faithful reconstructions of classic-style Hollywood sets and streets, such as Hollywood Boulevard and Sunset Drive, and miniatures complete with toy cars. And together they work wonders to create a fully believable, digital-free Tinseltown that is 5 decades past its time. Music. Anyone who has been keeping up with my channel should know that I love 60s music. The killer 60s soundtrack and Bad Times at the El Royale alone made it my favorite film of last year. Well, not just that, but still. And since Tarantino is known for putting together some iconic soundtracks, or let's be honest, iconic Tarantino mixtapes, such as with Reservoir Dogs, Little Green Bag, Hooked on a Feeling, Stuck in the Middle with You, and Coconut, and Pulp Fiction's Jungle Boogie, Son of a Preacher Man, Let's Stay Together, and Girl, You'll Be a Woman Soon, it was guaranteed that I'd love the soundtrack to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. In it, there's Deep Purple's Hush and Kentucky Woman, Simon and Garfunkel's Mrs. Robinson, Neil Diamond's Brother Love's Traveling Salvation Show, Paul Revere and the Raiders' Mr. Sun, Mr. Moon, and so many more. And all of them were really uniquely implemented because most of them were diegetic, as in actually coming from somewhere in the film, in this case usually a radio. And many times the music is actually part of a radio program the characters are listening to as they drive, complete with radio DJ and ads. And because of this, I typically found myself singing along and personally not minding the overly long driving sequences because they almost always included a banging track. Direction. Tarantino is, according to himself at least, nearing the end of his filmmaking career. He declared a handful of years ago that he wanted to cut off his directorial career at a solid 10 films. That means that this was his penultimate endeavor, and I must say, I was impressed. A lot of critics that I have read that have reviewed this film have said that it is Tarantino being arrogant and self-indulgent, but that wouldn't be a new thing. Look at Inglourious Basterds. He killed Hitler in a satisfying and gruesome way, and then ended the film by having the main character literally look into the camera and say,
"I think this just might be my masterpiece."
You really can't get any more arrogant than that. So by comparison, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is pretty tame, and a lot more mature. Yes, I'm stealing a descriptor used by many other critics, but it is so very true. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is a film about a director looking to his past and his influences, and sympathizing with the many filmmakers that struggled transitioning between Golden Age Hollywood and the 70s because he too feels like he is being left behind, a relic of a Hollywood forgotten. A Hollywood that still uses miniatures, lavish sets, and real film, as opposed to CGI, computer rendering, and digital cameras. And the final product is a film that is powerful, emotional, endearing, clever, and wholly Tarantino. He's done it again, folks. Yet another classic. My enjoyment. I enjoyed the hell out of this film. Every scene was engaging in a way that I haven't seen in a while. While I've really liked a lot of films that have come out this year so far, I loved Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. The acting is phenomenal across the board, and to me, a lot of the actors here rival Florence Pugh's masterful performance in Midsommar. While each and every Tarantino film is one that I will be watching for years to come, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is one that I want to watch even more. It is officially tied with Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction for my favorite Tarantino film of all time. I can't wait to see it again, because it is hands down my favorite film of 2019 so far. Recommendations. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is for any die-hard Tarantino fan, or anyone who is in love with the filmmaking craft, and if you are a fan of both, this film is wholly for you. Go and see it. But if you are mixed on Tarantino, hell, maybe even just think Tarantino is merely good instead of great, you may not like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. You might find its slice-of-life formatting and plotting storyline dull, its revisionist history a little unsavory, and its caricatures of prominent movie stars of the 60s era slightly tasteless. But none of this is new to Tarantino, so it probably won't bother any of his fans. And the film itself is a brilliant work of cinema on all fronts. It's got stupendous acting, fantastic dialogue, gorgeous production value, stellar cinematography, and everything in between. So if you think you fit the bill of being one of this film's target audience members, you will probably find Once Upon a Time in Hollywood to be a masterpiece. Thanks for watching, I hope you liked it. If you did, leave a like. If you want to add anything, feel free to leave a comment. If you want to see more, please subscribe. I am Professor Kino, and I look forward to our next discussion.